When sailors at Naval Station Norfolk saw Alex Rivera methodically cleaning weapons in the armory, they assumed she was just another low-ranking maintenance worker doing grunt work. What they didn't know was that they were dismissing one of the most decorated Navy SEALs in modern history, whose classified operations had neutralized high-value targets across 3 continents. This is the story of how a handful of arrogant sailors learned the hardest lesson of their military careers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Every morning at Naval Station Norfolk, while most sailors stumbled toward the mess hall clutching coffee cups and grumbling about Virginia's oppressive humidity, Petty Officer Second Class Alex Rivera was already deep into her daily routine. By 0600 hours, she'd have inspected every weapon system in the armory, cataloged ammunition supplies, and begun the meticulous process of cleaning rifles with a precision that bordered on obsessive. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. Each weapon received the same careful attention: bolt carrier groups, disassembled with practiced efficiency, barrels cleaned with methodical strokes, every component inspected for wear or malfunction. To the casual observer, it looked like the work of someone who took pride in following regulations. What they couldn't see was the muscle memory of someone who had once depended on these same weapons in life-or-death situations where mechanical failure meant never coming home. The Naval Weapons Station's armory was Alex's domain, a sterile concrete building filled with racks of M4 carbines, M240 machine guns, and various sidearms. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across workbenches covered with cleaning supplies, technical manuals, and spare parts. It wasn't glamorous work, but Alex had specifically requested this assignment. After years of high-stakes operations that she couldn't discuss with anyone, the quiet routine of weapon maintenance offered something she desperately needed: peace. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Stone ruled the weapons facility like his personal kingdom. A career Navy man with 22 years of service, Stone had never seen combat, but carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed his rank automatically commanded respect. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair, and a voice that could carry across a flight deck. Stone had built his reputation on running a tight ship and maintaining discipline through intimidation and public humiliation. "Rivera!" Stone's voice boomed across the armory that first Tuesday morning in September. "Those M4 South better be spotless before the afternoon training session. And don't even think about touching this specialized equipment. That gear requires qualified personnel, not glorified janitors." Alex looked up from the rifle she was cleaning, meeting Stone's gaze for exactly the appropriate duration, long enough to acknowledge the order, brief enough to avoid seeming insubordinate. "Understood, Chief," she replied in a voice so neutral it revealed nothing about her thoughts on his characterization of her role. What Stone didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Alex Rivera had more experience with specialized equipment than anyone else on the entire base. During her 8 years with SEAL Team 6, she had mastered weapon systems that most sailors had never even heard of. Sniper rifles capable of eliminating targets at distances exceeding a mile. Underwater assault weapons designed for maritime operations. Close-quarters battle techniques that had been developed through hard experience in the most dangerous places on Earth. But that was classified information, buried so deep in government databases that even her current commanding officers had no access to her complete service record. As far as anyone at Norfolk knew, Alex Rivera was a second-class petty officer who had somehow landed an easy assignment cleaning weapons for real sailors. The other enlisted personnel treated her accordingly. Seaman Tyler Brooks, a cocky 23-year-old from Phoenix who'd barely passed basic marksmanship training, seemed to take particular pleasure in reminding Alex of her perceived place in the hierarchy. Brooks was one of those sailors who joined the Navy expecting constant action and adventure, only to discover that military service involved a lot more routine maintenance than Hollywood had led him to believe. "Hey, Rivera," Brooks called out. During a break between training sessions, his voice loud enough to ensure everyone in the armory could hear. "You ever actually fire one of those weapons you're always polishing? Or do you just make them look pretty for the rest of us?" His buddies, laughed Seaman Carter, who'd grown up hunting in rural Georgia but couldn't hit targets beyond 50 yards. Petty Officer Williams, who'd been assigned to the weapons facility because he'd washed out of aviation electronics school. And several others who found comfort in having someone they could look down on in the military hierarchy. Alex continued. Her work, running a bore snake through the barrel of an M4 with the same careful attention she'd shown all morning. Her father had taught her, during long hunting trips in the mountains of Colorado, that responding to every provocation was a sign of insecurity. Real competence didn't need to defend itself against ignorant challenges. "Maybe she's afraid she'll break something," Carter added, emboldened by the laughter his previous comment had generated. "Cleaning's probably about all she can handle." What they couldn't see was the slight tightening around Alex's eyes, not from anger, but from the ironic amusement of being mocked for incompetence by sailors whose marksmanship scores she could have surpassed while blindfolded. During her final qualification with Team 6, she had achieved a perfect score on a combat shooting course that had a historical failure rate of 60%. These sailors struggled with stationary targets at ranges that she considered point-blank. Chief Stone, who should have put a stop to the harassment, seemed to enjoy the dynamic. It reinforced his authority and provided entertainment during otherwise routine duty days. "That's enough chatter," he'd say occasionally, but his tone suggested. He found the mockery more amusing than inappropriate. "Rivera, when you're done playing dress-up with those rifles, make sure you inventory the cleaning supplies. Wouldn't want to run out of the only job you're actually qualified for," Stone announced during one particularly busy afternoon. Timing his comment to coincide with a visit from personnel from other departments. Alex had developed coping strategies during her transition from active combat operations to regular Navy duty. She'd learned to find meditation in routine tasks, to appreciate the simple satisfaction of a job completed with excellence. But there were moments when some sailor who'd never faced anything more dangerous than a training exercise questioned her competence when she had to actively remind herself why she'd chosen this path. The truth was, Alex Rivera had seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. She'd participated in operations that had eliminated terrorist leaders, rescued hostages from impossible situations, and prevented attacks that could have killed thousands of innocent people. The psychological cost had been enormous. After her final mission, a classified operation in Southeast Asia that had gone sideways in ways that still gave her nightmares, she'd requested transfer to the quietest, most routine position the Navy could offer. Cleaning weapons offered a kind of therapy. The familiar weight of military hardware, the precise mechanical operations required for proper maintenance, the satisfaction of returning complex systems to perfect working condition, it all reminded her of the technical aspects of her previous work without the life or death stakes that had gradually worn away at her mental health. During lunch breaks, while other sailors gathered in groups to complain about their assignments or plan weekend activities, Alex preferred solitude. She'd take her meal to a quiet spot overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, watching cargo ships navigate the channel while she mentally processed the morning's work. The water reminded her of training exercises from years past, but also offered a sense of peace that had been missing from her life for too long. Sometimes, watching the other sailors during their training exercises, Alex would unconsciously catalog their mistakes: poor stance, inadequate breathing control, failure to account for environmental factors. These were fundamental errors that would have been unacceptable in her previous unit, but she reminded herself that not everyone needed to operate at that level. Most of these sailors would serve honorably without ever facing combat situations, where perfect marksmanship meant survival, but the irony wasn't lost on her. She was being mocked for incompetence by people whose skills represented perhaps 10% of her actual capabilities. It was like being criticized for poor penmanship by someone who had never learned to read. Chief Stone seemed to take particular pleasure in these situations. "Rivera," he'd announce when visitors toured the facility, "is our specialist in making things look good. The actual shooting, we leave to people who know what they're doing." The comment always generated polite laughter from visitors who didn't know enough about weapons or marksmanship to recognize the insult. But Alex would continue her work, maintaining the expression of professional neutrality that had served her well throughout her military career. What none of them understood was that Alex's quiet demeanor wasn't the result of incompetence or insecurity. It was the product of discipline earned through experiences that would have broken most people. She had learned, through years of high stakes operations, that the most dangerous operators were often the quietest ones. Real professionals didn't need to broadcast their capabilities to feel validated. As the weeks passed, the pattern became established. Chief Stone would assign her routine maintenance tasks, while making sure everyone understood that she wasn't qualified for anything more challenging. Brooks and his friends would provide commentary on her supposed limitations, and Alex would continue her work, maintaining equipment to standards that exceeded anything these sailors had ever seen, while quietly counting the days until her next assignment. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this situation wouldn't last forever. Sooner or later, something would happen that would test everyone's assumptions about competence, qualification, and respect. When that moment came, Alex suspected that several people at Naval Station Norfolk were going to learn some very uncomfortable truths about the quiet sailor they'd been so eager to dismiss. The harassment escalated 3 weeks into October, evolving from casual dismissiveness into something more systematic and cruel. It started when Seaman Brooks discovered that Alex had somehow failed her routine marksmanship qualification, or at least, that's what the official paperwork indicated. What actually happened was more complicated, but the simplified version spread through the base like wildfire. During her scheduled qualification, Alex had deliberately shot just below the minimum passing score. It wasn't incompetence. It was camouflage. Scoring too high would have drawn unwanted attention to skills she was trying to keep buried. Better to appear mediocre and maintain her quiet assignment than to excel and risk questions about training she couldn't discuss. But the optics were devastating. Word spread that the armory's weapon maintenance specialist couldn't even qualify on basic firearms. In a military culture where marksmanship represented fundamental competence, this was social death. "Did you hear about Rivera?" Brooks announced during morning chow, his voice carrying across 3 tables in the mess hall. "She couldn't hit water if she fell out of a boat. Scored a 198 on a 250-point course. Pathetic." The story grew with each retelling. By afternoon watch, Alex had supposedly missed every target. By evening formation, she'd allegedly broken down crying on the range. The narrative was always the same. The equipment technician who thought she belonged with real sailors had been exposed as a fraud. Chief Stone did nothing to discourage the gossip. If anything, he seemed to relish it. The failed qualification gave him official justification for the treatment he'd been dishing out all along. During a particularly busy afternoon when personnel from other commands were visiting the facility, Stone made sure to share the news. "Rivera here is proof that not everyone's cut out for the sharp end of military service," he announced to a group of visiting officers. "Good thing we have her cleaning weapons instead of trying to use them. Might accidentally shoot herself in the foot." The visiting officers laughed politely, not understanding they were witnessing the systematic humiliation of someone whose combat record would have impressed them beyond words. Alex continued organizing cleaning supplies, her expression neutral. But something cold flickered behind her eyes. The mockery became a daily routine. Every morning brought fresh commentary about her supposed inadequacies. Brooks appointed himself as the primary tormentor, but others joined in whenever they needed to feel better about their own limitations. "Hey, Rivera," Carter called out during a weapon cleaning session, "maybe you should stick to dusting. Seems more your speed than anything involving triggers." "Yeah," Williams added. "Wouldn't want you handling anything dangerous. Safety first, right?" The laughter that followed these exchanges had an ugly edge. This wasn't good-natured ribbing between shipmates. It was deliberate cruelty designed to establish hierarchy through humiliation. Alex had seen similar dynamics in boot camp, but she'd expected more professionalism from fleet sailors. What made it worse was how it affected her work environment. Other departments began treating her differently after word spread about her qualification failure. Personnel who'd previously shown professional courtesy now spoke to her with barely concealed condescension. Equipment requests that had once been processed promptly now came with skeptical questions about her competence. "Are you sure you can handle this maintenance requirement?" a lieutenant from the gunnery department asked when submitting a work order for scope adjustment. "Maybe I should have one of the qualified technicians take a look instead." The lieutenant meant Chief Stone, whose actual experience with precision optics was limited to reading technical manuals. But rank and perceived competence mattered more than actual knowledge, so Alex simply nodded and processed the paperwork. During lunch breaks, the isolation became more pronounced. The table where she usually sat alone seemed to have an invisible barrier around it. Conversations would pause when she approached, then resume in whispered tones after she passed. She'd become the cautionary tale that other sailors used to feel better about their own performance. "At least I'm not Rivera," became a common refrain whenever someone struggled with training or made mistakes during duty assignments. Her name had become synonymous with incompetence, a shorthand for military failure that served everyone else's psychological needs. The truth was more complex than anyone realized. Alex's failure to qualify was strategic, but it came with real consequences for her mental state. She'd spent years being part of an elite community where excellence was expected and mediocrity was unacceptable. Now she was deliberately portraying herself as the kind of sailor her former teammates would have regarded with pity. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. Every day required her to suppress instincts and knowledge that had been drilled into her through years of intensive training. When she watched other sailors struggle with basic weapon handling, she had to resist the urge to offer corrections that would have improved their performance dramatically. During one particularly frustrating afternoon, she watched Brooks attempt to zero a rifle scope for 20 minutes, making fundamental errors that any first-year firearms instructor could have identified immediately. His groupings were scattered across the target in patterns that indicated multiple mechanical problems. With his shooting technique, "This scope is garbage," Brooks complained to Chief Stone, unaware that Alex was within earshot. "Keep shooting high and left no matter what I do." Alex knew immediately what was wrong. Brooks was jerking the trigger instead of squeezing it smoothly, and his cheek weld was inconsistent from shot to shot. The scope was fine. The shooter needed remedial training, but she couldn't offer advice without revealing knowledge that would contradict her carefully maintained image of incompetence. "Maybe have Rivera take a look," Stone replied with mock seriousness. "She's our expert on making things look good, even if she can't make them work properly." The casual cruelty of the comment hit harder than Stone probably intended. Alex had spent years perfecting her skills with precision weapons, earning the respect of some of the military's most elite operators. Now she was being mocked by sailors whose shooting abilities represented a fraction of her actual capabilities, but she maintained her expression of professional neutrality and continued her work. Her father had taught her that dignity meant maintaining your standards regardless of how others treated you. She wouldn't abandon that principle now, even when it meant accepting daily humiliation from people who had no idea what they were talking about. The harassment extended beyond professional settings. During liberty hours, when sailors gathered at local establishments near the base, Alex would often overhear conversations that included her name as a punchline. The story of her qualification failure had become base folklore, growing more exaggerated with each retelling. "Rivera's so bad with weapons," she heard Brooks telling a group at a Norfolk bar. "They're thinking about transferring her to food service. At least there, the only thing she can shoot is mayonnaise." The laughter that followed made Alex grateful she'd chosen to sit in a corner booth where she couldn't be easily seen. But it reinforced her growing understanding that this situation couldn't continue indefinitely. Sooner or later, something would force her to make a choice between maintaining her cover and defending her dignity. That night, sitting alone in her barracks room, Alex stared at a photograph of her SEAL team from her final deployment. These were men who'd trusted her with their lives, who'd seen her perform under pressure that would have broken most people. The contrast between their respect and the treatment she was receiving at Norfolk was almost unbearable. She'd chosen this assignment to find peace, to serve her country in a way that didn't require taking lives or making split-second decisions that haunted her dreams. But peace came with a price, and that price was apparently accepting treatment that contradicted everything she'd earned through years of sacrifice and excellence. Tomorrow would bring more of the same, more mockery, more dismissal, more systematic humiliation from people who had no idea what real military service looked like. But Alex Rivera had survived worse challenges than hostile teammates, and she would find a way to maintain her dignity while serving her country in whatever capacity was required. Not everyone at Naval Station Norfolk was blind to the inconsistencies surrounding Alex Rivera. Petty Officer First Class Emma Walsh had been watching quietly from her position in the communications department, and what she observed didn't match the narrative everyone else seemed eager to accept. Emma had grown up in rural Montana, where her grandfather had taught her to hunt elk in terrain that demanded both patience and precision. She understood firearms in a way that went beyond military training. She knew the subtle signs that indicated real competence versus superficial knowledge. And everything about Alex Rivera's behavior suggested someone with far more experience than anyone realized. It started with small details that most people missed. The way Alex's hands moved during weapon maintenance wasn't the careful deliberation of someone following a checklist. It was the fluid muscle memory of someone who'd performed these tasks thousands of times under various conditions. When she field stripped an M4, her fingers found every component without conscious thought, like a pianist playing a familiar piece. More telling was how Alex reacted during training exercises she wasn't directly involved in. Emma had positioned herself where she could observe the armory during range sessions, and what she saw was fascinating. Every time a sailor struggled with their weapon, Alex would unconsciously shift her body position slightly, as if her muscle memory was providing corrections that her mouth couldn't voice. During one particularly frustrating afternoon when Seaman Carter was attempting to zero his rifle, Emma watched Alex's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Carter was making fundamental errors: inconsistent cheek weld, improper trigger control, failure to account for natural point of aim that were obvious to anyone with advanced marksmanship training. Alex clearly recognized every mistake, but she remained silent at her cleaning station. "You see it too, don't you?" Emma said quietly, approaching Alex during a break in the training session. Alex looked up from the rifle she was cleaning, her expression carefully neutral. "See what, Petty Officer Walsh? Carter's pulling his shots low and right because he's anticipating recoil. His grip pressure is inconsistent, and he's not following through on his trigger press." Emma pulled up a chair near Alex's workstation. "You knew he was going to miss before he even fired." For just a moment, Alex's mask slipped. Emma caught a glimpse of something deeper: knowledge, experience, maybe even frustration at watching preventable mistakes. "Lucky guess," Alex replied, returning to her work. But her tone suggested she was measuring Emma's knowledge, trying to determine whether this conversation represented a threat to her carefully maintained cover. "My grandfather spent 30 years as a hunting guide in the Bob Marshall Wilderness," Emma continued. "He taught me that you can tell everything about a shooter's capabilities by watching how they handle their weapon when they think nobody's looking. You handle firearms like someone who's never had to think consciously about proper technique." Alex's hands stilled on the rifle stock. The observation was uncomfortably accurate, and Emma's tone suggested she understood the implications. "Your grandfather sounds like he was a wise man," Alex said finally, her voice giving away nothing about her internal calculations. Emma leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Yesterday, when Brooks was struggling with that 300-yard shot, you shook your head before he even took aim. You were reading wind conditions, calculating bullet drop, processing environmental factors. I saw you doing the math in your head. The conversation was moving into dangerous territory." Alex had spent months perfecting her image as someone who understood weapons maintenance but lacked operational expertise. Now someone was calling attention to knowledge she couldn't explain without revealing information that was buried in classified files. "I've been around firearms long enough to recognize basic mistakes," Alex replied carefully. "That wasn't basic observation," Emma pressed. "You were analyzing that shot with the kind of expertise that comes from advanced training, real advanced training." Over the following days, Emma's curiosity intensified. She began paying closer attention to Alex's behavior, cataloging inconsistencies that others missed. During equipment inspections, Alex would occasionally handle specialized gear with a familiarity that exceeded her supposed training level. When technical discussions arose about weapon modifications or specialized ammunition, Alex would sometimes nod slightly at comments that demonstrated real understanding. Even when those comments came from personnel with advanced qualifications, the most revealing moment came during a safety briefing about sniper weapon systems that the base was temporarily housing for a visiting Marine unit. The briefing officer was discussing ballistic calculations for extreme range shooting, covering topics that were well beyond the knowledge level of most fleet sailors. Emma watched Alex during this presentation, noting how her attention sharpened when the discussion turned to environmental factors affecting long-range accuracy. When the officer mentioned specific techniques for reading mirage patterns and calculating windage adjustments, Alex's expression showed recognition rather than confusion. "These techniques require years of specialized training," the briefing officer explained. "Most military personnel never encounter this level of precision shooting." Alex remained perfectly still, but Emma caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested suppressed knowledge. This wasn't someone learning new information. This was someone listening to a review of techniques she already understood. That evening, Emma's investigation took a more direct approach. As a communications specialist, she had access to personnel databases that contained basic service records. What she found in Alex Rivera's file was mostly standard information: training completion dates, duty assignments, performance evaluations. That described her as competent but unremarkable. But buried in the electronic records was a single line that made Emma's blood run cold. "Previous assignment classification: compartmentalized. Access restricted to personnel with C clearance. Level Tango or higher." Emma stared at the screen. SCI clearance: sensitive compartmented information was reserved for intelligence operations and special access programs. The kind of clearance held by people who worked on missions that didn't officially exist. What was someone with that level of security classification doing assigned to routine weapon maintenance at a fleet base? Before she could investigate further, the system locked her out with a message indicating that additional information required authorization she didn't possess. But the seed was planted. Alex Rivera wasn't who she appeared to be, and Emma suspected that everyone on this base was about to discover exactly what they'd been overlooking. The next morning brought an interesting test of Emma's theories. During routine training, one of the M240 machine guns experienced a malfunction that stumped both the assigned operator and Chief Stone. The weapon was feeding properly but experiencing inconsistent ejection patterns that suggested a timing issue. Emma positioned herself where she could observe Alex's reaction as various personnel attempted to diagnose the problem. Brooks tried adjusting the gas regulator without success. Williams checked the bolt carrier group for obvious wear patterns. Stone consulted technical manuals while barking increasingly frustrated orders. Throughout this troubleshooting process, Alex continued her assigned tasks but kept glancing toward the malfunctioning weapon. Emma could see her mentally working through the problem, her experience providing solutions that she couldn't voice without revealing knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess. Finally, after 30 minutes of unsuccessful attempts to resolve the issue, Stone announced that the weapon would need to be sent to depot-level maintenance for evaluation. It was then that Alex made a mistake, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement that revealed everything Emma needed to know. As Stone was preparing paperwork to remove the weapon from service, Alex unconsciously started to move toward the machine gun, her body language suggesting someone who knew exactly how to fix the problem. She caught herself after 2 steps, returning to her cleaning station. But Emma had seen enough. That night, Emma made a decision that would change everything at Naval Station Norfolk. She wrote a carefully worded message to a contact in the personnel security office, requesting clarification about compartmentalized assignments and the procedures for verifying the background of personnel with unusual classification markers. The response came back within hours. Classification inquiry noted. Recommend consultation with Command Security Manager regarding personnel in question. Some service records require special handling procedures. Emma understood the implication. Alex Rivera's true background was protected by security classifications that exceeded normal personnel management procedures. Someone very important had ensured that her real qualifications remained hidden, which meant those qualifications were probably extraordinary. But secrets had a way of revealing themselves under pressure, and Emma suspected that pressure was coming. Soon, the base was scheduled to host a major training exercise within the month, bringing together personnel from multiple commands for advanced tactical scenarios. When that exercise began, everyone's true capabilities would be tested. Alex Rivera had been hiding in plain sight for months, accepting humiliation and mockery, while possessing skills that probably exceeded anyone else on the base. But Emma was beginning to understand that sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones nobody saw coming. And when the time came for Alex to reveal herself, the shock was going to reshape everyone's understanding of competence, respect, and the assumptions they made about quiet professionals who preferred to serve without recognition. November brought a noticeable shift in Chief Stone's behavior toward Alex. What had started as casual dismissiveness evolved into something more pointed and vindictive. The change seemed to coincide with his growing frustration about upcoming inspections and performance reviews that would evaluate his leadership of the weapons facility. Stone's 22-year career had been built on projecting an image of uncompromising competence. He'd cultivated relationships with senior officers by promising that his department ran like clockwork, no problems, no surprises, no personnel issues that required command attention. But having a sailor in his unit who'd publicly failed basic qualifications reflected poorly on his training and leadership effectiveness. "Rivera," Stone announced during morning quarters, his voice carrying across the assembled personnel, "I've been reviewing your performance metrics, and frankly, they're unacceptable for someone assigned to critical weapons maintenance." The attack was more formal than his usual casual mockery, delivered with the kind of official tone that suggested serious consequences were being considered. Every sailor in the facility turned to look at Alex, who maintained her standard expression of professional attention. Your inability to qualify on basic weapon systems raises questions about your competence to maintain equipment that other sailors depend on for their safety. Stone continued. I'm implementing enhanced supervision of your duties, effective immediately. The enhanced supervision proved to be a systematic campaign of micromanagement designed to find fault with Alex's work. Every task was scrutinized for deficiencies that had never been considered problems before. Cleaning procedures that had consistently exceeded standards were suddenly deemed inadequate. Equipment inspections that had previously earned commendations were now criticized for minor discrepancies that bordered on ridiculous. These rifle barrels aren't clean enough, Stone declared during one afternoon inspection, running his finger along metal surfaces that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. I can see residue that you missed. Completely unacceptable for someone who claims to be a weapons maintenance specialist. Alex examined the areas Stone indicated, noting that the supposed residue was actually normal metal oxidation that would appear on any steel surface exposed to humidity. Removing it would require abrasive cleaning that would actually damage the weapon's bore. But correcting Stone's technical error would require demonstrating knowledge about metallurgy and weapon preservation that exceeded her supposed qualifications. I'll address the discrepancies immediately, Chief, she replied, accepting criticism for problems that didn't actually exist rather than revealing expertise. She couldn't explain that the harassment extended beyond work performance. Stone began scheduling Alex for duties that were clearly intended as punishment rather than legitimate job assignments. She found herself assigned to inventory every bolt, washer, and spring in the facility's spare parts collection, a task that had no operational purpose and would take weeks to complete properly. Attention to detail, Stone explained when other personnel questioned the assignment. If Rivera can't handle basic marksmanship, maybe she can at least count parts accurately. Seaman Brooks, emboldened by Stone's increasingly hostile attitude, ramped up his own campaign of mockery. The failed qualification had become his favorite topic of conversation, and he never missed an opportunity to share the story with new audiences. You should have seen it, Brooks told a group of visiting personnel from another command. 25 yards, stationary targets, and she couldn't hit anything. I've seen recruits straight out of boot camp shoot better than that. What made the harassment particularly cruel was how it affected Alex's work environment. Other departments began questioning whether equipment maintained by someone with her supposed limitations could be trusted for critical operations. Requests for weapon maintenance came with additional requirements for verification and inspection that consumed time and resources. Lieutenant Foster from the Security Department submitted a formal request that all weapons maintained by Alex undergo additional testing before being returned to service. Given recent qualification issues, his memo stated, additional verification seems prudent for equipment that affects operational readiness. The implication was clear. Alex was being treated as a potential safety hazard whose work couldn't be trusted without extensive oversight. This was devastating for someone whose actual expertise far exceeded anyone else's on the base. But she couldn't defend herself without revealing information that would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The psychological pressure was enormous. Alex had spent years being part of an elite community where excellence was expected and recognized. Now she was being systematically humiliated by people whose skills represented a fraction of her actual capabilities. The cognitive dissonance of accepting criticism for incompetence while suppressing world-class expertise was exhausting. During one particularly difficult week, Stone implemented what he called remedial training for Alex. This involved assigning her to observe basic marksmanship instruction with new recruits, supposedly to help her understand fundamental concepts she'd apparently failed to master. Pay attention to how Instructor Martinez explains sight alignment, Stone told her with barely concealed satisfaction. Maybe you'll learn something that will help you pass qualification next time. The instruction covered techniques that Alex had mastered before her 18th birthday. She was forced to sit through explanations of breathing control, trigger squeeze, and stance fundamentals while pretending to absorb information she could have taught more effectively than the instructor. The humiliation was complete when Martinez, unaware of the context, offered to provide her with additional one-on-one coaching. "Don't worry, Rivera," Martinez said kindly. "Marksmanship is a skill that improves with practice. We'll get you qualified eventually." The well-intentioned offer of help from someone whose shooting abilities were far below her own represented the absolute nadir of Alex's situation. She was trapped in a role that required her to accept pity and remedial training from people she could have easily outperformed. But the final straw came during a particularly humiliating incident in the mess hall. Brooks, apparently feeling that his usual mockery wasn't having sufficient impact, decided to escalate his harassment in front of a large audience. "Hey everyone," Brooks announced, standing up at his table and projecting his voice across the dining facility. "Did you know we have our very own expert marksman right here? Rivera can make any weapon look absolutely perfect. She just can't actually hit anything with it." The comment generated laughter from sailors who'd heard variations of this joke before, but Brooks wasn't finished. "Maybe we should transfer her to the Navy band. At least there, the only thing she'd have to shoot is musical notes." The laughter was louder this time, and Alex felt every eye in the mess hall focused on her. This wasn't casual ribbing between shipmates. It was public humiliation designed to permanently establish her place at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Stone, who was present during this incident, did nothing to intervene. His silence represented tacit approval of the harassment, signal to everyone present that Alex Rivera was fair game for whatever mockery they wanted to dish out. Alone in her barracks room, Alex stared at the photograph of her SEAL team and made a decision that would change everything. She'd spent months accepting humiliation in the interest of maintaining her quiet assignment, but there were limits to what anyone should have to endure. She opened her footlocker and pulled out a secure communication device she hadn't used in months. There were people in the special operations community who knew her real capabilities, who understood what she'd accomplished during her years with Team 6. If this situation continued to deteriorate, she might need their support to find a new assignment that didn't require her to accept daily humiliation from people who had no idea what real military service looked like. But before she made that call, she wanted to give Naval Station Norfolk one more chance to surprise her. In her experience, crisis had a way of revealing people's true character. When that crisis came, and she suspected it was coming soon, everyone would learn exactly who they'd been so eager to dismiss. Chief Stone had made his choice to escalate the harassment beyond reasonable limits. Seaman Brooks had decided that public humiliation was acceptable behavior toward a fellow sailor. Soon, they would all discover the consequences of underestimating someone whose quiet professionalism had been mistaken for weakness. Alex Rivera had survived worse challenges than hostile teammates, but her patience was reaching its limit. When the time came to reveal herself, she would do so in a way that left no doubt about her capabilities or her worthiness of respect. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The announcement that would change everything came during morning formation on a crisp December day. Commander Lisa Harper, Naval Station Norfolk's executive officer, stood before the assembled personnel with the kind of expression that indicated something significant was about to happen. "Attention to orders," Harper began, her voice carrying across the formation with unmistakable authority. "Naval Station Norfolk has been selected to host Admiral Robert Kane for a special warfare demonstration next week. This represents an exceptional opportunity to showcase the training and capabilities of our finest personnel. A murmur of excitement rippled through the ranks. Admiral Kane was a living legend in the Navy, a former SEAL team commander whose operational record included some of the most successful counterterrorism missions in recent history. For most of these sailors, this would be the chance of a lifetime to demonstrate their skills before someone they'd only heard about in training scenarios and military history lessons. Commander Harper continued with the details. The demonstration will include a precision marksmanship competition featuring long-range shooting at distances up to 800 yards. Environmental conditions will be challenging, with variable wind patterns and changing light conditions designed to test advanced shooting skills. Chief Stone practically glowed with anticipation as the implications sank in. This was his facility, his range, his moment to shine before naval royalty. He'd spent the rest of the day making preparations, selecting his best shooters, and ensuring every detail would be perfect for the distinguished visitor. "This is what we've been training for," Stone announced to his assembled personnel after formation. "Admiral Kane will be evaluating our capabilities, and I expect nothing less than perfection from everyone involved." His gaze swept across the group before landing on Alex with barely concealed disdain. "Rivera, I want every weapon system spotless for this demonstration. And make sure you stay out of the way during the actual shooting. This is for qualified personnel only." "Understood, Chief," Alex replied with her standard professional neutrality. But Emma Walsh, who'd been observing the interaction from her position near the back of the group, noticed something different in Alex's posture. There was a tension there that hadn't been present before, as if the announcement had triggered some internal calculation. Over the following days, Stone's preparations became increasingly frantic. He drilled his selected marksmen relentlessly, critiquing every aspect of their performance while growing more frustrated with results that fell short of his expectations. The pressure of performing before Admiral Kane was affecting everyone's shooting, creating the kind of nervous tension that destroyed accuracy. "This is unacceptable," Stone barked after Seaman Carter missed a 600-yard target by several inches. "Admiral Kane has seen precision shooting that would make your best efforts look like amateur hour. We need to do better." What Stone didn't understand was that his constant criticism was making the problem worse. His shooters were thinking too much, second-guessing their fundamentals, and fighting their equipment instead of working with it. These were the kinds of mistakes that Alex observed daily but couldn't correct without revealing knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess. Meanwhile, Brooks had discovered that the upcoming demonstration provided new opportunities for mockery. "Good thing Rivera won't be shooting," he announced during one training session. "Might accidentally hit the Admiral instead of the target. That would be one way to make military history." The comment generated the usual laughter, but Alex's reaction was different this time. Instead of maintaining her standard neutral expression, there was a brief flash of something harder in her eyes. Emma, who'd been watching carefully, recognized it as the look of someone whose patience was finally wearing thin. 3 days before the demonstration, Stone received additional pressure from the command structure. Commander Harper visited the range personally to observe training and assess readiness. What she saw clearly concerned her. "Chief Stone," Harper said after watching several unsuccessful attempts at long-range targets, "I need to be confident that this demonstration will reflect well on Naval Station Norfolk. Admiral Kane's visit represents significant visibility for our command." Stone's face reddened with a combination of embarrassment and frustration. "Ma'am, we're experiencing some challenges with the environmental conditions. Wind patterns have been unusually variable, and the conditions next week will be what they are," Harper interrupted. "Professional marksmen adapt to environmental factors. They don't use them as excuses for poor performance." The rebuke was polite but devastating. Stone was essentially being told that his range wasn't producing results worthy of Admiral Kane's attention. And everyone present understood the implications for his career if the demonstration went poorly. That evening, Stone's frustration boiled over into something approaching desperation. He called a special meeting of all weapons facility personnel, his tone suggesting that drastic measures were being considered. "I've been thinking about our personnel assignments for next week's demonstration," Stone began, his voice tight with barely controlled stress. "We need to present our absolute best capabilities to Admiral Kane, which means ensuring that only our most qualified personnel are visible during the event." His gaze fixed on Alex with unmistakable intent. "Rivera, I've decided that your presence during the demonstration would be problematic. Your qualification issues reflect poorly on the facility's training standards. I'm reassigning you to inventory duties in the storage building during Admiral Kane's visit." The assignment was clearly intended as both punishment and humiliation. While the rest of the facility showcased their skills before a legendary military leader, Alex would be counting spare parts in a building far from the action. It was Stone's way of ensuring that his perceived failure as a trainer wouldn't be visible to the Admiral, but Stone wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, "I'm recommending that you be transferred to a different department after this evaluation period. Someone with your limitations might be better suited to duties that don't involve weapons systems." The threat was explicit now. Stone was essentially promising to end Alex's assignment to the weapons facility and potentially damage her career prospects throughout the Navy. This went beyond harassment into the realm of professional destruction. Based on manufactured concerns about competence, Alex stood perfectly still as Stone delivered his ultimatum. But Emma noticed her hands had formed fists at her sides. This was the breaking point, the moment when accepting humiliation in the interest of maintaining cover became impossible to sustain. "Chief," Alex said quietly, her voice carrying a tone that made several people in the room shift uncomfortably, "I understand your concerns about the demonstration, but I've been assigned to this facility by competent authority, and I take my duties seriously." Stone's expression hardened. "Your duties are whatever I say they are, Rivera. And next week, your duty is to stay invisible while real sailors demonstrate real capabilities." The confrontation represented everything that had been building for months. Stone's need to scapegoat someone for his facility's shortcomings, Alex's growing frustration with accepting undeserved criticism, and the fundamental injustice of someone being punished for skills they couldn't reveal. That night, Alex sat alone in her quarters, staring at the secure communication device she'd retrieved from her Foot Locker days earlier. The time for maintaining her cover at any cost was ending. Stone had crossed a line by threatening her career and attempting to prevent her from serving her country in whatever capacity was required. She thought about her SEL teammates, who'd respected her capabilities and trusted her with their lives. She thought about the missions they'd accomplished together, the lives they'd saved, the sacrifices they'd all made in service to something greater than themselves. The contrast with her current treatment was unbearable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new humiliations, new attempts to diminish her worth as a sailor and as a person. But Alex Rivera had reached a decision that would change everything at Naval Station Norfolk. When Admiral Kane arrived for his demonstration, he would discover more than Chief Stone expected. The quiet sailor who'd been dismissed as incompetent was about to remind everyone what real naval service looked like. And when that revelation came, several people were going to learn very uncomfortable truths about competence, respect, and the assumptions they'd made about someone whose silence had been mistaken for weakness. The morning of Admiral Kane's visit dawned gray and windy, with gusts coming off the Chesapeake Bay that would challenge even experienced marksmen. Alex arrived at the weapons facility before anyone else, as had become her routine. But today, she carried an additional case alongside her standard equipment bag, something she hadn't touched in months. By 0800 hours, Naval Station Norfolk's finest marksmen had assembled at the range. The competition represented the elite of the base's shooting talent. Senior Chief Davis, who'd won 2 fleet marksmanship competitions. Petty Officer Martinez, recently returned from advanced sniper training. First Class Jackson, who'd served as a designated marksman during 2 deployments. These were sailors whose careers revolved around precision shooting. Chief Stone strutted around the preparation area like a man whose reputation depended on the next few hours, which, in many ways, it did. He inspected equipment with obsessive attention to detail while barking orders that revealed his nervous energy. "Remember, people, we're representing the entire naval station today," Stone announced to his assembled marksmen. "Admiral Kane has seen shooting that would make most of us look like amateurs. I expect nothing less than perfection." Alex had been assigned to the equipment maintenance area at the edge of the shooting platform, exactly as Stone had promised. From this position, she could observe the proceedings while remaining essentially invisible to the distinguished visitor. It was meant as punishment, but it provided her with the perfect vantage point to assess the competition and the conditions. At 845 hours, a black SUV with escort vehicles pulled up to the range facility. Admiral Robert Kane stepped out, and every sailor snapped to attention. He was smaller than Alex had expected, maybe 5'9", with silver hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. His uniform displayed ribbons that read like a history of special operations over the past 25 years. But what struck Alex most was something others couldn't see. Kane carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd led men through impossible situations and brought them home alive. She recognized the posture because she'd seen it in mirrors during her own operational years. "At ease," Kane said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from earning respect rather than demanding it. "I'm here to observe your capabilities, not interfere with your procedures. Please continue with your demonstration." The competition began with targets at 600 yards, progressing to 800 as conditions permitted. The wind was tricky, gusting from the southwest at 12 to 15 knots, with enough variation to challenge even experienced shooters. Senior Chief Davis went first, settling into position behind a standard Navy rifle with practiced efficiency. His first shot hit 8 inches low and 3 inches right of center, respectable for most standards, but not the bullseye that would truly impress their distinguished visitor. Petty Officer Martinez followed, managing to get closer to center mass but still missing the precision that Kane was undoubtedly accustomed to seeing. Each subsequent attempt brought increasingly frustrated expressions from Stone, who'd clearly expected better results from his hand-picked marksman. As the shooting continued, Alex found herself unconsciously analyzing each shooter's technique and the environmental conditions affecting their performance. The wind was shifting every 90 seconds as thermal currents came off the water, creating conditions that required constant adjustment. Most of the competitors were using standard calculation methods that couldn't account for these rapid changes. Challenging conditions, Admiral Kane observed mildly after watching 6 attempts that failed to achieve the precision he'd obviously expected. But Alex caught the undertone. He wasn't impressed by what he was seeing. Emma Walsh, who'd positioned herself where she could observe both the competition and Alex's reactions, noticed something significant happening. Alex was no longer maintaining her carefully neutral expression. Instead, she was studying the Admiral with an intensity that suggested recognition rather than curiosity. After the 8th attempt resulted in another near miss, Kane's attention began to wander from the official competitors. His gaze swept across the assembled personnel before settling on Alex, who was methodically organizing cleaning supplies while obviously following every shot with professional interest. "Chief Stone," Kane said suddenly, "who's the sailor maintaining equipment over there?" Stone followed Kane's gaze with obvious reluctance. "That's Petty Officer Rivera, sir. Equipment maintenance specialist. She's not qualified for precision shooting." Kane's expression shifted slightly, as if Stone's response had provided information that didn't quite match his expectations. "I see. And what's her background? Basic naval training, sir. Some technical school for weapons maintenance. She's had qualification issues with marksmanship standards. Alex felt every eye on the range turning toward her as this conversation unfolded. Stone's description made her sound like exactly the kind of sailor who would be assigned to support duties rather than operational roles. But Kane wasn't finished. "Petty Officer Rivera," he called out, his voice carrying across the range. "What's your assessment of these shooting conditions?" The question hit the assembled sailors like a thunderbolt. Why would a legendary admiral be asking for technical analysis from someone who supposedly couldn't qualify on basic weapons? Alex set down her cleaning supplies and stood, every instinct from her operational years telling her that this moment would define everything that followed. "Sir, winds are gusting southwest at 14 knots with thermal variance every 90 seconds. Temperature differential between ground and air is creating mirage patterns that shift the apparent target location approximately 4 inches at 800 yards. A murmur ran through the assembled sailors. This was technical language that most of them had never heard outside of advanced sniper schools, delivered with the confidence of someone who understood these factors intuitively. Kane nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Very detailed assessment. And what would you recommend for shooters attempting precision work under these conditions?" Alex hesitated for just a moment, knowing that her answer would either maintain her cover or shatter it completely. "Sir, shooters need to time their shots to the thermal cycles and adjust for continuous wind variance rather than using static calculations. These conditions require adaptive shooting techniques." Stone looked like he'd been slapped. His equipment maintenance specialist was demonstrating knowledge that exceeded most of his qualified marksmen. "Interesting," Kane said, his tone suggesting he was drawing conclusions that others couldn't follow. "Tell me, Petty Officer Rivera, have you had any experience with precision shooting under challenging conditions?" This was the moment Alex had been dreading and anticipating for months. The direct question that would force her to either lie to a superior officer or reveal information that would change everything. "Some experience, sir," she replied carefully, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. Kane's slight smile suggested he understood exactly what "some experience" meant when delivered in that tone by someone with her obvious knowledge. "Well then," he said, turning back to Chief Stone, "perhaps Petty Officer Rivera would like to demonstrate proper technique for your qualified marksman." The suggestion hit the range like an explosion. Stone started to sputter an objection, but Kane's raised hand silenced him immediately. Every sailor present understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. An admiral essentially ordering someone who'd supposedly failed basic qualifications to demonstrate advanced marksmanship. Alex felt the weight of dozens of stares as she walked toward her equipment case. For months, she'd maintained the fiction that she was just another support sailor. Now in front of Admiral Kane and everyone who'd spent those months mocking her capabilities, she was about to reveal exactly who they'd been so eager to dismiss. Rifle case opened to reveal a precision weapon that made every other firearm on the range look like standard issue equipment. This wasn't military property. This was a custom-built instrument designed for exactly the kind of shooting that was about to be demanded. Chief Stone's face had gone completely pale as the implications of what was happening began to sink in. His unqualified equipment maintenance specialist was about to demonstrate capabilities that would redefine everyone's understanding of competence, qualification, and respect. Alex knelt behind her rifle with movements that immediately revealed the truth to anyone with eyes to see. Her stance wasn't the careful positioning of someone following memorized procedures. It was the fluid efficiency of someone for whom precision shooting was as natural as breathing. Every experienced marksman on the range recognized the difference instantly. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the wind patterns against her skin and listening to the subtle environmental cues that most shooters never learn to interpret. When she opened them again, her breathing had already settled into the rhythm that would carry her through the shot sequence. Through her scope, the 800-yard target looked impossibly small, but Alex wasn't seeing just a piece of paper. Downrange. She was processing wind speed, thermal variance, barometric pressure, and a dozen other factors that would affect bullet trajectory. Her father had taught her years ago in the Colorado mountains that precision shooting was 10% marksmanship and 90% understanding physics. The crosshair settled with the kind of steady precision that comes from thousands of hours of practice under conditions far more challenging than a Virginia morning. Her breathing reached the natural pause that every elite shooter recognized as the moment of perfect stability. The rifle cracked once. For a heartbeat, absolute silence dominated the range. Then someone in the distance began shouting coordinates. Back to the shooting line. Dead center. Perfect bullseye. The silence that followed was deafening. Every sailor on that range had just watched someone they'd dismissed as incompetent achieve the kind of precision that most of them had only heard about in training stories. Admiral Kane stood slowly from his observation chair, his expression completely transformed from polite interest to focused attention. When he spoke, his voice carried across the range with unmistakable authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his tone indicating that everyone present was about to receive information that would change their understanding of everything. "Allow me to properly introduce Petty Officer Alex Rivera, formerly of SEAL Team 6, and the primary operator responsible for neutralizing high-value targets during Operation Neptune's Blade." The effect was immediate and devastating. Every person on that range knew about Neptune's Blade, the counter-terrorism mission that had eliminated an entire terrorist cell while rescuing 14 hostages from a compound that intelligence had said was impossible to assault successfully. Neptune's Blade, someone whispered with the kind of reverence reserved for military legends. Kane continued, his voice ensuring that every detail was clearly understood. During Operation Neptune's Blade, Petty Officer Rivera provided precision overwatch for the assault team while enemy snipers had our forces pinned down in hostile urban terrain. She eliminated 11 confirmed threats at ranges exceeding 600 yards, often in conditions that would challenge our most elite operators. Chief Stone looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Around the range, sailors were connecting dots, remembering every joke they'd made, every dismissive comment, every time they'd treated a genuine war hero like she was barely qualified to clean their equipment. Brooks, who'd appointed himself as Alex's primary tormentor, stood frozen with his mouth open, finally understanding that he'd been mocking someone whose combat achievements exceeded anything he could imagine. But Kane wasn't finished. The psychological cost of precision operations like Neptune's Blade can be enormous. After eliminating multiple targets to save the lives of her teammates and innocent hostages, Petty Officer Rivera requested transfer to support roles. She wanted to continue serving her country, but in ways that built rather than destroyed. Alex finally stood, slinging her rifle with movements that every observer now recognized as those of someone who'd done this under fire. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't want to take any more lives," she said simply. "I'd had enough of killing, but I still wanted to serve." The admission hit everyone present with tremendous force. This woman had voluntarily given up recognition, status, and the respect that came with elite qualifications because she'd chosen service over personal glory. Emma Walsh, who'd suspected the truth for weeks, felt a combination of vindication and sadness as she watched her theories confirmed. Alex Rivera hadn't been hiding from failure. She'd been hiding from a success that had cost her more than anyone realized. "Why didn't you tell us?" Seaman Brooks asked, and for the first time since anyone had known him, his voice held genuine respect instead of mockery. Alex looked at him directly, her expression showing neither anger nor satisfaction at his obvious discomfort. Because past achievements don't determine present worth. I wanted to be valued for who I am now, not who I used to be. Admiral Kane nodded approvingly. That attitude is exactly what made her exceptional in the first place. Humility combined with extraordinary skill, service before recognition, mission. Accomplishment without regard for personal credit. The transformation in the assembled sailors was complete and immediate. These men and women finally understood that the quiet person they'd dismissed possessed combat experience that exceeded their collective training by orders of magnitude. More than that, they understood that they'd been privileged to work alongside. Genuine heroism, and had been too blind to see it. Senior Chief Davis, who'd considered himself the range's premier marksman, approached Alex with obvious humility. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology that I don't have words for." "We all do. You don't owe me anything," Alex replied. "We're all here to serve our country. That's what matters." But Chief Stone remained frozen, slowly realizing that his career had just taken a hit from which it might never recover. He'd spent months systematically humiliating a decorated combat veteran, and he'd done it in front of witnesses who would remember every cruel comment, every dismissive order, every attempt to diminish someone whose service record made his own. Look insignificant by comparison. Admiral Kane turned his attention to Stone with the kind of expression that ended careers. "Chief, I believe we need to discuss your leadership methods and their impact on personnel retention and morale." Stone's face had gone completely white. He understood immediately that his treatment of Alex Rivera would become a case study in everything wrong with military leadership. Word of this incident would spread throughout the fleet within hours, but Alex wasn't looking at Stone anymore. She was looking at the sailors who'd begun approaching her with genuine questions, seeking guidance from someone they finally recognized as their superior in every way that mattered. "Ma'am," Petty Officer Martinez asked respectfully, "would you be willing to teach us some of the techniques you just demonstrated?" Alex studied the faces around her sailors who hours earlier had been mocking her supposed incompetence, now seeking instruction from someone whose expertise they'd finally recognized. "Real precision isn't about the rifle," she said finally. "It's about understanding yourself, your environment, and your mission. If you're willing to learn those things, then yes, I'm willing to teach." The irony was perfect. The woman who'd been dismissed as unqualified to maintain their equipment was now being asked to train the Navy's supposedly elite marksmen. But more importantly, she was being asked to share knowledge that could save their lives if they ever faced the kind of situations she'd survived. Admiral Kane smiled slightly, recognizing a teaching moment when he saw one. "Petty Officer Rivera, how would you feel about a reassignment that would allow you to share your expertise with more personnel who could benefit from your experience?" The offer represented everything Alex had given up when she'd chosen anonymity over recognition. But it also represented an opportunity to serve her country in a way that built capabilities rather than destroyed enemies. Looking around at the faces of sailors who'd finally learned to see beyond their assumptions, Alex made a decision that would reshape both her career and their understanding of what real service looked like. Within hours of Admiral Kane's revelation, word of the demonstration had spread throughout Naval Station Norfolk like wildfire. The story grew with each telling, but for once, the embellishments couldn't match the reality. By evening watch, every sailor on the base knew they'd been sharing their facility with a genuine SEAL team. Six operator whose combat record included missions that had become legendary in special operations circles. Commander Harper convened an emergency meeting that afternoon, gathering all personnel who'd witnessed the morning's events. The conference room felt smaller than usual as Chief Stone, Alex, Admiral Kane, and the witnessing sailors filed in. Harper's expression was carefully neutral, but experienced military personnel could read the storm brewing behind her professional demeanor. "Chief Stone," Harper began without preamble, "I've received multiple reports about your treatment of Petty Officer Rivera over the past several months. Would you care to explain your leadership approach? Stone's career flashed before his eyes. Every cruel comment, every public humiliation, every attempt to undermine Alex's position was about to be scrutinized by officers whose opinions would determine his future in the Navy. "Ma'am," Stone began, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Petty Officer Rivera's personnel file showed qualification issues. I was attempting to maintain standards appropriate for weapons facility operations. Admiral Kane leaned forward. Slightly. "Chief, what specific qualification issues justified the systematic harassment that multiple witnesses have described?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Stone realized that his justifications, Alex's, deliberately failed. Marksmanship test and her quiet demeanor sounded pathetic when measured against her actual capabilities and service record. "Sir, her marksmanship qualification was below standards, and she seemed reluctant to engage in training discussions that would have improved her performance." Her reluctance, Kane replied with devastating calm, was likely due to the fact that discussing her actual training would have required revealing classified information about operations you lacked the clearance to know about. Emma Walsh, who'd been observing from the back of the room, finally spoke up. "Sir, if I may, Chief Stone's behavior went beyond professional criticism. He publicly humiliated Petty Officer Rivera on multiple occasions and threatened her career." Advancement. Harper turned to Emma with interest. "Petty Officer Walsh, you witnessed these incidents?" "Yes, ma'am." Chief Stone created an environment where mocking Petty Officer Rivera became acceptable behavior for other personnel. He encouraged harassment instead of preventing it. The testimony was damaging enough, but Brooks, who'd been one of Stone's most enthusiastic supporters in tormenting Alex, cleared his throat nervously. "Ma'am, Chief Stone never told us to stop when we made jokes about Rivera's qualifications. He seemed to enjoy it." The admission took courage, but it also represented Brooks accepting responsibility for behavior he now understood had been completely inappropriate. He was essentially confessing his own misconduct to protect what remained of his integrity. Harper's expression hardened as the scope of the leadership failure became clear. "Chief Stone, you're relieved of your position as Weapons Facility Supervisor. Effective immediately. You'll report to the Executive Officer for reassignment and counseling. Your fitness report will reflect today's revelations about your leadership methods." Stone nodded stiffly, understanding that his career wasn't over, but had just taken a devastating hit that would follow him for years. The Navy had long memories for officers who mistreated exceptional personnel, especially when that mistreatment became public knowledge, but Harper wasn't finished with the consequences. "Seaman Brooks, your participation in harassment of a fellow sailor is unacceptable regardless of what you believed about her qualifications. You'll receive formal counseling and additional training on professional conduct." Brooks accepted the punishment without protest, recognizing that he was receiving far more lenient treatment than his behavior deserved. "Ma'am, I'd like to request permission to apologize personally to Petty Officer Rivera." Harper looked to Alex, who nodded slightly. "Petty Officer Rivera, do you wish to hear Seaman Brooks's apology?" Alex studied Brooks's face, seeing genuine remorse rather than the cocky attitude she'd endured for months. "Yes, ma'am." Brooks stepped forward, his usual swagger completely absent. "Ma'am, I owe you more than an apology. I was wrong about everything, and I'm ashamed of how I acted. You served our country with honor while I was making jokes about capabilities I didn't understand." The sincerity of his words was evident to everyone present. This wasn't a performance designed to minimize punishment. It was genuine recognition of how completely he'd misjudged both Alex and the situation. "We all make assumptions, Brooks," Alex replied quietly. "The question is what we do when we discover we're wrong. I'd be willing to help you become a better marksman if you're interested in learning." The offer of instruction from someone whose expertise far exceeded anyone else's on the base represented extraordinary grace under circumstances where anger would have been completely justified. Admiral Kane, who'd been observing these exchanges with professional interest, addressed the broader implications. This situation highlights critical issues about how we identify, develop, and respect talent within our organization. Too often, we make assumptions based on limited information while missing extraordinary capabilities that could benefit everyone. Harper nodded, understanding the systemic problems that Kane was identifying. Sir, how do we prevent similar situations in the future? By creating environments where competence is recognized regardless of rank, background, or personal presentation. Kane replied, real leaders identify and develop talent wherever they find it. They don't allow qualified personnel to be diminished by those too insecure to recognize capabilities that exceed their own. The discussion that followed covered policy changes, training requirements, and cultural shifts that would prevent future incidents. But the most important change was already visible in the faces of sailors who'd learned to question their assumptions about competence and respect. Senior Chief Davis, who'd initially been selected as one of Stone's premier marksmen, approached Alex after the formal proceedings concluded. Ma'am, I've been thinking about what happened today, and I realize I have a lot to learn about precision shooting. Would you be willing to work with me on advanced techniques? The request represented a complete reversal of the morning's hierarchy. Davis was senior in rank and had considered himself the facility shooting expert, but he was now seeking instruction from someone whose expertise he'd failed to recognize. Real precision shooting isn't about ego, Senior Chief, Alex replied. It's about understanding that there's always more to learn. I'd be honored to share what I know. Similar conversations were occurring throughout the facility as sailors who'd dismissed Alex began approaching her with questions, requests for guidance, and offers to learn from someone whose capabilities they'd finally recognized. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. These sailors were confronting their own prejudices about competence, qualifications, and the assumptions they made about people who didn't fit their preconceptions. That evening, as Alex cleaned her precision rifle one last time before securing it, she reflected on the day's events. The cover she'd maintained for months was gone, but in its place was something more valuable: the opportunity to serve her country by sharing knowledge that could make other sailors more effective and potentially save their lives. Emma Walsh approached as Alex was finishing her equipment maintenance. Ma'am, I wanted you to know that I suspected something was different about you for weeks. Your knowledge was too detailed, your competence too natural. Alex looked up from her rifle. What gave it away? The way you handled equipment. The unconscious corrections when other people made mistakes. The technical knowledge you couldn't quite suppress. Emma smiled. My grandfather always said that real expertise shows itself in small ways, even when people are trying to hide it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to serve. But tonight, Alex Rivera was content knowing that sometimes the most important victories weren't won with precision shooting, they were won with patience, dignity, and the courage to be exactly who we're meant to be. 3 weeks after Admiral Kane's visit, Alex found herself in an office she'd never expected to occupy. The nameplate on the door read Advanced Marksmanship Training Coordinator, a position that had been created specifically to utilize her unique combination of combat experience and instructional ability. The transformation from dismissed equipment technician to respected training authority had been swift and complete. Her first official class consisted of 12 sailors, including several who'd spent months mocking her supposed incompetence. Senior Chief Davis sat in the front row, his notebook open and ready, the picture of professional attention. Brooks occupied a seat near the back, his previous arrogance replaced by genuine eagerness to learn from someone whose capabilities he'd finally recognized. I'm not here to teach you how to shoot, Alex began, her voice carrying the quiet authority that came from years of operational experience. You already know basic marksmanship. I'm here to teach you how to think while you're shooting, and more. Importantly, how to make decisions under pressure that extend far beyond hitting targets. The curriculum she'd developed went far beyond traditional marksmanship training. Instead of focusing solely on technical skills, Alex emphasized the psychological and tactical aspects of precision shooting that most military programs barely addressed. Every shot has consequences that extend beyond the immediate target, she explained during one session. In operational environments, you're not just making holes in paper. You're making decisions that affect missions, teammates, and potentially innocent civilians. Technical skill is meaningless without the judgment to use it appropriately. Brooks, who'd initially expected advanced shooting techniques, raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, this is different from any marksmanship training I've received. Why do we need to think about these broader implications?" Alex studied his face, seeing genuine curiosity rather than the challenge that might have been intended months earlier. Because anyone can learn to hit targets at distance. But understanding when to take a shot and when to choose alternatives, that's what separates competent marksmen from truly effective operators. The distinction was subtle but crucial. Alex was teaching decision-making skills alongside shooting techniques, preparing these sailors for situations where perfect marksmanship would be worthless without perfect judgment. Senior Chief Davis approached her after the third session, his expression thoughtful. "Ma'am, I've been thinking about what you said regarding environmental awareness. I realize I've been treating shooting like a mechanical skill when it's actually more like problem solving." "Exactly," Alex replied. "Precision shooting is applied physics combined with psychology. You have to understand ballistics, environmental factors, equipment limitations, and human performance under stress. Most training programs only cover the first part." Word of her unconventional teaching methods spread quickly through Norfolk and beyond. Other commands began requesting copies of her curriculum, and senior officers who'd heard about the philosophical marksmen started attending her sessions as observers. The real validation came from her students. Sailors who completed Alex's program didn't just shoot more accurately, they made better decisions under pressure, understood their role in larger missions, and carried themselves with the quiet confidence that came from comprehensive preparation. Emma Walsh, who'd transferred to the advanced training program as Alex's assistant instructor, marveled at the transformation in personnel who'd completed the course. "They're different people," she observed during one of their planning sessions. "More thoughtful, more professional, more aware of their responsibilities." "That was always the goal," Alex replied. "Technical skills are just tools. Wisdom about when and how to use those tools, that's what really matters." But the most significant change was in Alex herself. For the first time since leaving SEAL Team 6, she was using her complete skill set in service to her country. The knowledge she'd gained through years of high-stakes operations was now shaping the next generation of naval personnel, creating ripple effects that would extend far beyond anything she could directly observe. Late one evening, as Alex reviewed performance reports from her latest class, she found a handwritten note that had been slipped under her office door. "Ma'am, my grandfather always said that the best teachers change how you think, not just what you know. Thank you for helping me understand that being a sailor means more than just following orders. It means taking responsibility for the consequences of our actions. Respectfully, Seaman Tyler Brooks." Alex smiled, recognizing the growth that Brooks's note represented. The cocky young sailor who'd made her life miserable for months had evolved into someone who understood the deeper implications of military service. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Admiral Kane entered, his presence filling the small office with the kind of authority that commanded immediate attention. "Petty Officer Rivera," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I've been receiving reports about your training program from commands throughout the fleet. The feedback has been extraordinary. Alex set down the performance reports she'd been reviewing. "Sir, I'm just trying to ensure these sailors are prepared for whatever situations they might encounter." Kane leaned forward slightly. "Your program is being discussed at levels that would surprise you. There's talk of implementing your approach fleet-wide, making psychological preparation and ethical decision-making standard components of all advanced weapons training." The implications hit Alex immediately. Her father's lessons, learned during hunting trips in the Colorado mountains and refined through SEAL Team 6 operations, could potentially influence how the entire Navy approached precision shooting. Tactical decision-making. "Sir, that's an incredible opportunity to improve how we prepare our people for challenging situations." "There's something else," King continued. "The Department of Defense is establishing a new training command focused on developing advanced capabilities while maintaining the highest ethical standards. They're looking for someone with your unique combination of operational experience and educational ability to head the program." The offer represented everything Alex had given up when she'd chosen anonymity over recognition. But it also represented a chance to serve her country in a way that could benefit thousands of military personnel over the coming years. "Sir, I'd be honored to consider such an assignment." Kane smiled, recognizing the measured response of someone who understood the magnitude of what was being offered. "Take your time making the decision. But know that your approach to training, emphasizing judgment alongside skill, character alongside competence, is exactly what our military needs." As Kane departed, Alex sat alone in her office, contemplating the journey that had brought her from the mountains of Colorado, through the hell of combat operations to this moment of opportunity. Every experience had prepared her for this role. Even the months of humiliation at Norfolk that had taught her patience and resilience. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from one of her former SEAL teammates. "Heard about your new assignment through the grapevine. Proud of you for finding a way to keep serving while staying true to your values. The teams could use more instructors with your perspective." The validation from someone who understood both her capabilities and her struggles meant everything. She'd found a way to use her skills in service of something larger than herself, while helping others develop not just competence but wisdom. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to shape how America prepared its warriors. But tonight, Alex Rivera was content knowing that her father's lessons about precision, patience, and moral responsibility would live on in every sailor she trained. 6 months after accepting the position as director of the new Department of Defense Ethical Combat Training Command, Alex stood before an audience of instructors from every branch of the military. The auditorium at Quantico was filled with Marines, soldiers, sailors, and airmen who'd come to learn about integrating moral decision-making with tactical training. The transformation had been remarkable. What started as one woman's quiet service at a naval base had evolved into a fundamental shift in how America prepared its warriors for the complexities of modern combat. Alex's approach, emphasizing judgment alongside skill, character alongside competence, was now being implemented across multiple training commands. Excellence in military operations isn't just about technical proficiency, Alex told the assembled instructors. It's about developing personnel who can make sound decisions under extreme pressure while maintaining the moral standards that define us as professional military forces. In the audience, she spotted familiar faces. Emma Walsh, now a senior instructor in the program, sat in the front row taking notes. Brooks, who'd requested transfer to become one of Alex's assistant trainers, occupied a seat near the middle, his transformation from arrogant tormentor to dedicated professional, serving as inspiration for everyone who witnessed his journey. The most surprising attendee was Chief Stone, who'd requested permission to audit the course as part of his rehabilitation program. His career had survived the Norfolk incident, but he'd spent months in counseling and remedial leadership training. Now he sat quietly in the back, listening to instruction from someone he'd once tried to destroy. After the session, Stone approached Alex with obvious hesitation. "Ma'am, I know I have no right to request your time, but I was hoping we could speak privately." They walked to a quiet area, overlooking the training facilities where hundreds of military personnel were learning the principles Alex had developed. Stone looked older, humbled by experiences that had cost him his illusions about leadership and competence. "I came here to apologize," he said simply. "Not just for how I treated you, but for what I failed to learn from you. I spent months working alongside someone who could have made me a better leader, a better sailor, a better person. Instead, I let my insecurities and prejudices blind me to an opportunity that will never come again." Alex studied his face, seeing genuine remorse and something more understanding of the principles she'd been trying to teach all along. "Chief, everyone deserves a chance to grow from their mistakes. The question is what you do with the lessons they provide." "I've requested assignment to a training command," Stone continued. "I want to learn to develop personnel the way you do, with respect, with understanding, with focus on making them better people as well as better warriors." The conversation reminded Alex of something her father had often said: influence spreads in ways you never expect. The lessons she'd learned in the Colorado wilderness were now shaping military personnel across the globe, creating ripples that would extend far beyond anything she could directly measure. That evening, Alex received a video call from Admiral Kane, who was now serving at the Pentagon. His office walls displayed photos from a distinguished career, but his expression carried the satisfaction of someone who'd helped create lasting, positive change. "Alex," he said, using her first name in acknowledgement of how their relationship had evolved, "I wanted you to see something before it becomes public knowledge." He held up a document bearing official Department of Defense letterhead. "The Secretary of Defense is announcing the creation of the Rivera Protocol mandatory ethical decision-making training for all personnel assigned to combat roles. Your approach is becoming the standard for how we prepare our people for the moral complexities of military service." The honor was overwhelming. Alex's name would be permanently associated with efforts to ensure that American military personnel were prepared not just for the technical challenges of their duties, but for the moral responsibilities that came with serving their country. But the real validation came in smaller, more personal moments. Letters from former students describing how her training had influenced their decisions in operational environments. Reports from commanders noting improved performance and decision-making among personnel who'd completed her programs. Stories of lives saved because someone had learned to think as well as shoot. Brooks knocked on her office door one evening, carrying a folder thick with documentation. "Ma'am, I've been compiling feedback from units that have implemented your training protocols. The results are incredible." The reports detailed improved performance across multiple metrics, better decision-making under stress, reduced instances of inappropriate force application, increased confidence among personnel facing complex scenarios. But more importantly, they showed evidence of the cultural change Alex had been working to create. "There's something else," Brooks continued, his voice carrying obvious pride. "My little sister just graduated from the Naval Academy. She specifically requested assignment to a command that uses your training methods. She said she wants to serve in an organization that values wisdom as much as warrior skills." The comment encapsulated everything Alex had been working toward. The next generation of military leaders was seeking out training that prepared them for the full spectrum of their responsibilities, not just the technical aspects of their jobs. As she reviewed the evening's reports, Alex reflected on the journey that had brought her from that humiliating morning at Norfolk to this moment of institutional influence. Every experience had been necessary. The mountains of Colorado that taught her patience, the operations with SEAL Team 6 that showed her the true cost of violence, even the months of mockery that had taught her resilience and the value of quiet dignity. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from one of her former teammates. Saw the news about the Rivera protocol. Dad always said the best operators were teachers at heart. Proud of you for finding a way to multiply your impact beyond anything you could accomplish individually. The message reminded her of something she'd learned during her darkest moments at Norfolk. Sometimes the most important service happened quietly, without recognition, in ways that prepared others for challenges they might never face themselves. Late that night, Alex walked through the training facilities where tomorrow's military leaders were learning to balance lethal skills with moral judgment. In darkened classrooms, she could see evidence of the changes she'd helped create. Curricula that emphasized decision-making alongside marksmanship. Scenarios that required ethical reasoning under pressure. Evaluation criteria that measured character alongside competence. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. The most important shot is often the one you don't take. But now she understood the deeper meaning. The most important influence was often the one that prevented violence rather than enabling it, that built wisdom rather than just capability, that created leaders who understood that true strength came from knowing when force was necessary and when restraint was wiser. The quiet sailor who'd once been dismissed as incompetent had become one of the most influential trainers in the modern military. But she still began each day the same way she had at Norfolk, with quiet preparation, respect for the flag, and dedication to serving something greater than herself. Some heroes charge into battle. Others stand quietly in training facilities, teaching young warriors that the most important weapon they carry isn't their rifle, it's their judgment. Both kinds of heroes serve with honor. Both kinds of heroes make their country proud. And sometimes, if they're very fortunate, both kinds of heroes get to see the lasting impact of lessons learned from a father who understood that true precision extends far beyond marksmanship to include precision in character, in decision-making, and in understanding when strength means restraint rather than action. Excellence doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs to be ready when called upon, and wise enough to know the difference between being called to destroy and being called to build. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.